in my polyamorous phases, I never came close to any of the material that comes up in the feeling of locked in, engulfed monogamy.
Hi, what's going on? Smart Couplers. Jason Gaddis here, back with another episode of the Smart Couple Podcast. Episode 76. Moving up there. I want to thank you for your ears and for listening and for caring, and especially if you're one of those people that actually does the action steps, thank you. Because chances are you're seeing results from those action steps. You're seeing a little shift, a little tweak, a little aha moment. Maybe you had better sex. Maybe you finally held your partner's hand after a lot of tension and fighting. Maybe you looked in each other's eyes and there was a little twinkle. Maybe you're single and you met someone because of something that happened here. Maybe you were able to self-reflect enough to get something about yourself that then shifted some relationship in your life. Whatever the case, I appreciate you, the listener, a lot. Okay. Quick story. My wife and I had some recent distancing. Not really a fight, you know what I'm talking about, but a little bit of avoiding, a little tension, not hugging as much, not snuggling up as much. And our general vibe was not as strong, right? So we finally figured it out, what it was. And here's the moral of the story without boring you with all the details. One of us goes vulnerable, and that unlocks something, and then we're now feeling connected again. So remember that. Quick tip here. Whenever things are a little tense or distant, one of you's got to go vulnerable. And when you do, there's now connection again. And whenever I have tears in my eyes, for example, my wife's like, oh, there you are. I can show up for you now. But when the porcupine quills are going on, she's like reacting against that largely unconsciously. And I'm doing the same with her, distancing and her vibe, right? And so we're just going to kind of be two strangers in the night, even though we're not. Like even when Ellen and I are disconnected, we still rock it out by and large in our family. We're still operating at a high level. We still can get logistics done efficiently. We're still super respectful. We have each other's backs on going and doing our own thing. And yet it just doesn't feel as good. You know what I'm talking about? And so for us to get to that place, it usually requires a little vulnerability. That's vulnerable. It's a vulnerable moment. Go there. Go there. Okay. That's finding your way back in to yourself. Just like in the podcast a couple episodes ago on disconnection and reconnection, you got to find connecting with you again and or your partner. And one of the ways, the best lubrications I know for that is vulnerability. All right. This podcast is for growth development geeks who want to understand relationship better and are willing to apply some tools, read some books, listen to some podcasts, go to some mentors, guides, coaches, therapists, and other people to help you get a different result because you're frustrated. All right. You guys are action takers. Typically, you're not sitting on the sidelines hoping for a better relationship because that's going to get you nowhere. And my job is to challenge you into action and doing something about your relationship life. So if that's you, again, right on. Okay. Today is an unusual episode because I want to talk about relationships and spirituality. And it's something I haven't really dove deep into on the podcast, but I have certainly dove very deep in it in my own life. And prior to learning about marketing very much, that's what I often led with, was relationship as a spiritual path. And if you Google Jason Gaddis and relationship as a spiritual path, you'll see my old posts on the subject. So I've written a lot about it. I've talked a lot about it. I've taught a class or two on it, and I'm kind of geeked out on it. But I stopped using that frame because a lot of people don't buy it or subscribe to it, and it can be off-putting for some people. And this episode, I think you're going to understand a little bit why that is. And, this is interesting. Maybe at the end of this episode, I'll share a short story about how and why I got really interested in relationships and spirituality. So if you feel like a little bonus round after my interview here, stay tuned. I'll tell you a little story. So in order to have this conversation about relationships and spirituality, I thought I'd bring on one of my favorite people who writes vigorously on the subject, and that's Jeff Brown. Jeff Brown is a really kind of legendary status, in my opinion, on Facebook. If you followed him at all, you know that the dude conjures up a lot of likes and shares with his short creative posts on spirituality, relationships, life, soul work, connection, dealing with ourselves. And he's funny, he's witty. He does a lot of funny wordplay, which you'll see on this episode. And the guy is just wise and confronting and gentle, and he's got it all in him, and I appreciate him. We've been cyber friends for a couple of years. He asked me to do a praise acknowledgement for his Love It Forward book, so I got to get a manuscript of that, which was kind of fun, and I really I loved it. So he's an author, a filmmaker, a grounded spiritualist, he calls himself, and a teacher. He's out there teaching people how to be in their bodies and make their human journey, which I really respect. The guy was an attorney, a psychotherapist. He was a filmmaker. He sent me this movie years ago called Carmageddon, the movie, really about kind of the hidden shadow of spiritual teachers. And there was one spiritual teacher he was studying with in particular. It was really cool and confronting, edgy film that he did, documentary. So he's hard at work. He's definitely a warrior, had been in the trenches for years. As you'll say, he's kind of coming out of that phase of his life and going into another phase, and I'll let him talk about that. But wow, does this guy have a lot of great frames on the human condition and how to work with ourselves and how to do relationship. And so we get into some good terrain around spirituality, meditation, the New Age movement, which Jeff has his own name for that, you'll hear. And I think it's a fun, lively conversation that I think you're going to get a lot of value from, particularly those of you who have, for whatever reason, been on a spiritual path in your life. I think you're going to resonate with some of what Jeff's saying. All right, welcome to the show, Jeff Brown.
Thank you, Jason Gaddis.
You got it, man. Really good to have you here and finally be chatting via Skype with you. I've been following you for years now on Facebook, and I just love what you put out there. So thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
So today we're going to talk about relationships, of course, and maybe particularly some views on spiritual relationships, because a lot of people like that conversation. And first, though, I want to get a little, for the listener, I want to get a little background on you. How did you've written books on love and relationship and spirituality. How did you get into the work you're doing? And maybe tell the listener, what exactly do you do?
I mean, I was a lawyer for about 11 seconds. And my book, Soulshaping, really pretty much details kind of that journey up to the point of writing that book, where I felt called away. I mean, I love the law. You know, I worked with a very prominent criminal trial lawyer in my articling year here, and we did a very, very intense trial. And at the end of it, I felt torn between walking in that direction, which felt so comfortable, easy, and familiar, and walking in the direction of some inherently, I guess, unknown path. And then ultimately, after many years of working on my emotional process and removing obstacles to expression, it just became clear that it was time to write. I'd had the calling to write throughout my early life. I knew I would do law and then study psychology and then write. That always seemed to me intrinsic to my path, but I wasn't quite ready to move in that direction. I had a lot to learn. And then I started to write when I was 39. I'm 54 now. After a profound love experience cracked me open that I wrote really about, was inspired to write about Uncommon Bond in relation to that. And then I haven't been able to really stop writing since. And so now I'm writing, but I also own Enrealment Press. So we're publishing me and other people. Andrew Harvey has a wonderful book called Evolutionary Love Relationships coming out on Valentine's Day with us that I think you would love, Jason. And I'm teaching at Soulshaping Institute, and I intend to start a men's movement as well after the last book that I'm writing, which is a book about my lens on spirituality, some of the things I know you're interested in. So I'm doing a lot of things and just trying to find a way to do it in a way that's healthier. I really used my warrior energy the last 15 years to punch my way through this, and my body is telling me that it doesn't want me to do that anymore, and I don't really economically need to do that anymore, so I'm trying to find another way.
Oh, wonderful. Cool. Wow, what an arc. And there's lots of places we could pause in there. And give us a little demographics. Where do you live? Are you married, kids, no kids, divorced, all that stuff?
Yeah, I live outside of Toronto in Canada. I got married for the first time in April of 2015 to the poet who wrote Hope is a Traveler, Susan Fribort. She's from Indiana, and she's living with me here now in Canada. I don't have any biological kids to my knowledge. And she has a daughter, Lindsay, who's my stepdaughter, who is at present living in Indiana, who's 18.
Cool. Great. And what primarily do you do? You're clearly a writer, author, teacher. When you talk about soul shaping, what is soul shaping and what does that mean? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, I think, James Hillman used the wonderful term, the innate image, and I use the term soul scriptures. And I just believe we come into this birth with an intrinsic path or purpose, what I call sacred purpose. It's all the same thing. But for me, that doesn't just include a particular calling. It can also include archetypal transformation or very much an emphasis on the emotional healing journey. I don't make a distinction between emotional maturation and spiritual maturation in my work and my writing. And most of the work that I've done to transform in this experience of something we call spirituality happened through shifting, changing, and growing in my emotional body. So for me, all of that is sacred purpose. Whatever your primary issues and patterns are, the work you have to do to work through them so that you can become more fully and deeply present and mature in your spirituality, to me is as important as finding that calling, in my case, I guess the calling to write and bringing that work to the world, or finding the archetypal work you need to do. For me, moving from probably a more malevolent warrior consciousness to a more benevolent or surrendered warrior consciousness in this lifetime. All of that for me is sacred purpose, and all of that is soul shaping. That is doing whatever work is fundamental to your path that will bring you one step closer to wholeness.
Wow. So you're in the business of helping people be more of who they are through their soul, sacred soul purpose.
Yeah, I think that feels right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I liked what you said better. I'm just trying to kind of encapsulate it for myself.
Yeah, no problem.
And wow. Okay. And what do you, when you work with people, and you teach people and you write and people respond to your comments on Facebook, what are people struggling with? What do you see as kind of the common human struggle, particularly as it pertains to relationship to self or other?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many of those struggles. But I think, if I can think of two primary things that thread through it, one is this really confusing gap or division between survivalism as a way of being versus authenticity as a way of being. So, most of our lineage defined themselves by what put food on the table. That's who they thought they were. That was, whichever polarity allowed them to survive and function, whatever job or career path happened to make things continue so that the rent was paid, all of that. is really how we've defined everything and how our societal structures are organized. And those of us like you who are beginning to move into the direction of who am I really, this question of authentic and true path, trying to bridge these two worlds, trying to create space for the authentic quest in the heart of a survivalist landscape, trying to even distinguish ourselves from the masks and disguises that have allowed us to stay alive, to ask the deeper question of why am I here? What gifts, offerings, and callings live at the heart of me? So that to me is one of the primary threads that course through everybody that I do work with. And the other is trying to figure out how to bridge the gap between the work we do on the self and the work we do in a relationship. I mean, for most people, it's all they can do to figure out what their issues are. I mean, to expect them to be in a room with another person seeking authentic conscious dynamic over decades and decades, keeping energetic charge, growing forward together, when it's all most people can do to figure out what the hell's wrong with them, is of great confusion to people. They don't know whether to put their energy into the development and healing of the self, whether to do that in a relational context or not. I feel as though the ultimate path for us really is the relational framework. My most profound experiences of divinity happened in the relational field, but I'm also well aware of how confusing and complicated and difficult that is at this stage of development. We don't really have the tools for a lot of that. Your work is to develop those tools, and versus and I see why, ungrounded, transcendent spirituality, lone wolf warrior on the meditation cushion going vertically to God is so much more appealing, because that's a lot more manageable than trying to figure out a way to sustain and deepen that opening in relationship. And I experienced that this really is a primary challenging thread for many of the people that I work with.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. Yeah, it's so confusing. And I like what you said about asking someone to do something maybe they're not capable of doing with years of maybe generations of charge and living in their body. And you're asking them to be present about something, and they just can't do it, and then maybe they beat themselves up. And then also this
right.
notion of warriorship to the vertical, of which again I tried for a while, and then I'd come home to my relationship and be a basket case, right? So that's why I love relationships so much, and why I resonate with you, is because you get this. And so where does a person, like in your programs, for example, or maybe books, or just in this moment, where does a person start then that you would recommend, given the massive amount of misinformation perhaps, or confusing guidance?
Well, I think the psychotherapeutic journey is incredibly important, especially for people who are seeking something called spirituality. I don't define spirituality the way that the Western world is defining spirituality. So for me, it's indistinguishable from the emotional journey. So most people, I point them in the direction of emotional healing, and often in a somatic way. Body-centered psychotherapies like bioenergetics, core energetics, Stan Grof's holotropic work, Peter Levine's work, Hakomi work, all of those modalities I think are very important. I think we have to empty the vessel before we can even begin to know what path lives inside of us. If we're all bunked up with unresolved material and debris that hasn't been cleared, it's very hard to get clarity as to the next step on the path. And that emotional transformation and healing work actually prepares us for the next step on the journey as well. So that's really where I lead people in that direction. And unfortunately, in the so-called spiritual community, there's so much movement in the bypass community in particular away from the emotional body work, calling it, as Eckhart does, the parasitic pain body. All of these dissociative versions of spirituality are confusing for people, because in the West they're being encouraged to develop a healthy self-concept, which we need to do this work, and to develop the healthy ego and to heal the brokenness. And then they're listening to really distorted versions of Eastern spirituality who are leading them away from the body and the emotional body and calling it non-duality when they've removed everything unresolved from the non-dual field. So people end up completely confused as to whether to develop the ego, whether to disparage the ego, whether to feel good about themselves, whether to think there's no self at all. So I just try to lead people back into the nuts and bolts, common sense, healing of their broken-heartedness, and to link that into their experience of something called spirituality.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I'm with you, man. I mean, the work I do with people is really, I want to give you street level tools to help you in your practical situation at home with your wife and kids, or your husband and
Yeah, absolutely,
brother-in-law.
absolutely. I call it ascending with both feet on the ground, and I don't even know if ascension is the right way to look at this anymore. I think it really, if you go horizontal with everything, I think you have a much better shot at expanding your consciousness.
Yeah. Where with all the confusion around spirituality, if someone starts, especially, my listener is definitely into personal growth and development. So they're the type of person who is probably going to do a lot of seeking and listening to podcasts and reading lots of books.
Yep.
And maybe going to lots of psychotherapy and trying to meditate and trying to do yoga and getting all these, and then listening to Eckhart and then Adyashanti. And okay, he tells me to just be one with God or go into my empty space in my mind. But again, I see spirituality falling short when it comes to the human condition and relationships. Do you see that?
Well, I don't think that they're spiritual teachers. I mean, I define spirituality as reality. So the spiritual teacher is the dude at the donut shop who's actually trying to hold all the various realms together at one time. Many of those people have just mastered a singular thread of consciousness, like the witnessing consciousness. But to me, that's not spiritual. That's just limited, threaded perceptiveness. That's just one singular way of being. And this patriarchy has taught us this, to really perfect a singular thread and call that an enlightened field. And to me, there's nothing, and then every other part of their life is a mess if you really get to know many of them. So for me, real spirituality is about trying to exist in all realms. I call it Western consciousness, the quest for essence fundamental to the East, and the quest for a healthy self-concept fundamental to the West. You have to find the oneness field, and then it has to meet your individual droplet of meaning. And if you go in one direction too far, you're just floating off, and we all know about that. You're just doing some kind of transcendence bypass. If you go too far in the direction of only the self, you move in the direction of an unhealthy narcissism. So for me, it's about finding that blended point right in between for everybody. So I encourage everyone out there who's exploring something called spirituality not to believe that meditation is the royal road to the kingdom of God, not to believe that yoga, which often in its origins was an attempt to get away from the toxic body beast, emotional body and physical body, to explore everything on the psychological realm, in the so-called spiritual realm, and just decide for themselves what feels true. You need to have some solitude, and we're so bloody overwhelmed now. And I asked Alexander Lowen, when I interviewed him before he died, and the bioenergetics master and creator, how do we do this now, Al? And he said, you can't. It's moving so quickly that nobody knows how to take space for their process. And if you can't take space for your process, you're not going to be able to sift through all the garbage and figure out what resonates and what doesn't.
Got it. So you're recommending solitude.
Yeah, so I call it solitude. But you need time with yourself. I spent so much time lying on the couch just feeling into my bones. Having moved so quickly for so long, it was so unfamiliar to me. And it was so uncomfortable, Jason. But that's really where I found the nuggets of gold. And that's where I could do the work to distinguish between teachings that were of value to me and teachings that were taking me in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I'm with you. The body-based meditations that I finally learned were extremely helpful for me to get into my emotional landscape.
Right on.
What do you? Let's transition to guys for a minute. What's going on with men today? And because you're into helping men. You've written a lot about men. You had your own journey as a man. How do you help men, and what would you recommend to the male listener who might not quite feel emotions yet, or might be a little numb, but staying curious and wants to have a good relationship, maybe is kind of intrigued about personal growth and development, but is also leery because of everything you're saying? What do you recommend to men out there?
It's funny. I have this course on my website called Sacred Feminine Rising, Healing the Effects of Unawakened Men. It's a course for women. And I've had it there for years, a very busy course. And I've tried for a number of years to write a course for men, like healing and awakening, something like that, the sacred masculine. It's the hardest course in the world to write because I don't have a real clear and simple answer. I mean, sure, psychotherapeutic process to the extent that they're willing to do it. Even body-centered work. A lot of men that I've worked with aren't comfortable with therapy. but they're comfortable with doing things that are physical. So what I encourage them to do, for example, is to explore various forms of massage, body-centered work that allows them to have an experience of peeling away the musculature in the armor in the hopes of getting a little closer to the emotional material that lives below it. But beyond that, I don't have a very simple answer to your question.
And why does that matter that maybe a man, I mean, for obvious reasons I can guess, but like, why does he need to peel away the armor? Like, how's that going to help him in his life?
Well, I think it would. My view is heartfulness is a path to presence, and a lot of men that I've worked with refuse to do that work. They just want to keep spinning out into some version of non-duality where they can basically dissociate from the emotional body. Well, we've done that. I mean, for me, patriarchy's been doing this forever in the form of spirituality and in the way the marketplace has developed. I don't make any distinguish between, disembodied non-duality and, corporate pathology. To me, it's all about disconnecting from the heart. So because for me, and this may just be my bias, most of my transformation happened and most of my awakening happened and most of the revealing of the next step on my path to wholeness happened through my willingness to peel away the pain body material, to get deeply in touch with the source of it, and to clear it on out. Every time I did deep clearing, Jason, I had real clarity as to the next step on my path.
And is that what you're calling awakening? Because someone might be listening going, is that enlightenment? Like, are you enlightened, Jeff? Like, what do you mean?
No. Oh, God, that's just a stupid,
okay, so what is awakening?
That's just a word for selling product. No, I prefer the word even in awakening. I mean, for me, it really is just about getting clearer on why you're here. I mean, and part of that is tapping into a unified field. But so much of that really for me is about coming back, and this is my bias and my belief that everybody comes in with sacred purpose. So how do we access sacred purpose? And for me, so much of that had to do with clearing through the musculature, the armored holdings, and the related armored ways of being, and to learn how to make armoring a conscious process so that, like, for example, when I was a young kid, I used to sell door to door. I made a lot of money in the window business and put myself through school. And before I would go sell, I'd go into the Johnny on the job to take a leak, and I'd say to myself, I'd say it out loud, I'd say, I have to leave you now. And I was talking to my idea of my core or my source or center, and I have to go put on a sales mask and make a living. So I'd get hyped up, I'd put on a sales mask, and at the end of the day, I'd drive home and say, okay, now you can come back home. And so for me, men need to understand there's a distinction between the role they're playing in the world, and it's not to say that we don't have to play those roles, and who lives below the roles. And if we're aligned and integrated, it's all the same. But I don't believe that's the truth because of the cultural divide between survivalism and authenticity. So the more work they can do to peel away the layers, just to explore even what lives below, I think the more likely they are to come closer to an experience of authenticity and peace with path.
Yes, nice. Yeah, I was just working with a guy, for example, prior to our call, who took a high-paying job in the oil industry, and clearly is unsatisfied, right? But he's built up his personality around it, and now it's starting to come crashing down because he's getting more honest with himself. He's like, wait, this isn't. I'm just a pawn in someone else's game. This is actually not who I want to be and who I am.
Yeah, and I think what happens eventually, at least what happened to me, and a number of people I know. At first, there's this bifurcation, like you have to kind of go off to the authentic landscape, and then you experience, you go to Omega or Esalen for a week, and then you come back to your job, and every day it's painful, and you re-entry trauma and all the rest. But I think eventually what happens is that authentic way of being becomes so fundamental to you, and this is the scary part of it, that eventually you can't leave it behind. It's not something you can really put away very much.
Right, it's not optional anymore.
And then you just become this being that kind of integrates the pragmatism of the world we live in and the heartfulness of the world that lives within. And you try to find a way then to make a living in that framework. And some people do it as salespeople. I called it selling with God. I was still selling windows, but I was a different guy selling windows than the guy that I was before.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So men getting back into their heart, anything that will help them get back in their heart. I'm with you. It's a good thing. If you're, I have a lot of women listeners, and if they're with a guy who might be a little bit in the realm of what we're talking about, he's confused, he's maybe down someone else's path, he's a little defensive around psychotherapy, how can she because you clearly work with women dealing with guys like this. How can she help him?
Jason, I never have a good answer to that question.
Okay. I was going to ask anyway.
And I also don't want to put it on women that this is their responsibility, which many people do believe, and I don't believe that. And so I used to tell them to just leave a book around, kind of in a way that didn't look obvious, so that the dude would pick it up. But I don't have a. I mean, what's your answer to that question? I would like to know.
Yeah. Well, I say, look, if you're with who you think is a wonderful man below all his defenses, for certain he is an amazing human being, which often he is, then you have one shot at helping him, and he's probably not going to go to psychotherapy. He's probably not going to read that book, and he's probably not going to go to a men's group or something like that. So you're his only shot. And if you care about him, why not try to see if you can get in there and say, honey, I need this. I actually need an emotional connection with you to feel satiated in our relationship. I don't need it all day long, but I need it to come and go in our connection, like when we were first dating or whatever. Are you up for that? Will you try to do that with me? So I try to encourage women to advocate for themselves and help him out a little bit by giving him a little coaching. And then if he's super defensive and resistant, then the next step is probably move on to a guy who's more available.
Yeah. That's a lovely and hopeful answer.
Right on. So with your own relationship, do you mind if I ask you a couple questions about that?
No problem.
What, you've been dating, you said about a year and a half?
We got married in April of 15, but we met on Facebook at the beginning of 2013.
Okay, nice. So long enough to get past the honeymoon phase, right?
Yeah,
or if there ever was one.
We're supposed to actually have our honeymoon in Bali in December. But yes, I would certainly say that we've now entered a terrain where we're dealing with material that was not evident previously.
Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, exactly. So how do you and your partner, what are some, let's just pick one thing, conflict around finances or conflict around some sticking point. How do the two of you navigate it? Maybe take us to a moment that was particularly challenging, and what practical tools did you use to get through it?
We've had so much stuff come up lately that, we're very good dialoguers. We don't, we come to a place that feels sticky, and we never seem to go to the next level of stickiness. One of us seems to intuitively know how to pull us back from that. Let me think of a recent issue. No, nothing's coming to mind. If she was here, I could ask her.
And when you're in the stickiness and you don't go any stickier and you're dialoguing well, you said one person usually pulls you out. Is that have to do with listening perhaps, or taking a pause and taking a time out and coming back to it later?
Yeah, there is a pause. We have a lot of separate work that we do from each other. And then when we come back, one of us seems to have stepped back and looked at and understood whatever the trigger material is through a vaster lens. We just seem to come back to a deeper, vaster, and more compassionate lens. And we don't seem to continue the feeling of personalizing of the material. It's like an ability to somehow go to the source, or, I think some of this has to do with age and stage. I'm 54, Susan we're over 50, and, there's a kind of a gratitude that we have for having found this in our lives. She was married once before, and it was not a good situation, and I knew that I would marry later in life, but I've been through a lot of hardship in relationship as part of my path, but there's a deep gratitude. So I think because that's there, it somehow is able to permeate any of our tendencies, our conditioned tendencies to remain reactive. So we go to the perspective of gratitude, and I mean grounded gratitude. I don't mean floaty gratitude, which somehow invites us in the direction of unpacking the material in a way that's more healing.
Yeah, and you said you kind of both go off, and I thought I heard kind of we go do our own thing, do our own work. Yeah. How essential is that in your relationship, that you both do your own work?
Yeah, one of our problems is we run a lot of these shows in the house, so we're now learning to be even more separate. But it's important. It's important in the emotional sense as well, because I know, and I have a good friend who stays in a reactive dynamic a lot of the time, and they're in close quarters a lot of the time, and they don't have those step backs. I think you need the step backs. I can't get perspective. If once my stuff, because of my early childhood trauma, once really profoundly intense stuff is ignited, I need to have a step back. And she's an expert she spent her life, retreating into herself in order to make sense of things and to find a more positive way forward. And it seems to serve us.
All right, great. That's helpful. Step backs, you're calling them step backs, timeouts, space, basically, and going and working on yourself is what I heard is helpful for you too.
Yeah, I think once you learn enough that when you get into that place where it feels hopeless, where the stickiness feels a bit hopeless, once you've done it enough times and you've stepped back enough times and found your way through to the next level of evolution in the connection, surprise, surprise, not hopeless at all. In fact, the portal to a more connected dynamic. Once you've done that enough, you can start you just got to get through the early phase of that without assuming that it's the wrong connection and you have to run away from it, because you need a taste of that transformation and transition. And we've had a number of those.
Yeah. And transformation, it seems to be, it has to come with some level of discomfort, it seems like.
Well, at this stage of human development, there's no question that's true. I mean, we were wounded relationally. We're going to heal relationally, but it's going to be a partly unpleasant experience. Who wants to excavate that material? And at the same time, we know we don't have any choice.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for saying that. It's really, I teach that a lot about, look, you have to go toward discomfort here if you want a good relationship, because what you're saying is so true that on the other side of that little bump in the road, you're going to come out stronger and feeling maybe more connected and more empowered.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, Jason, I felt, I could name my primary issue areas independent of relationship. I just knew them from all kinds of other places in my life. But some of the most important subtleties of the stuff that I'm holding and material that I'm holding and areas of triggering that I'm holding, I would never have known about those things except in dynamic. They just don't come up. They don't show themselves to me. And so if I want to have a complete experience of healing, or at least as complete an experience as I can have, there's no way that I can do it on my own. And in my polyamorous phases, I never came close to any of the material that comes up in the feeling of locked in, engulfed monogamy, which is so hard for someone who grew up in an uncomfortably engulfed environment. So if I stay in polyamory, for example, as playful as it is, and of course I get in touch with my jealousy issues, I get in touch with a lot of things in that framework, but I don't come in contact with the deepest wound material from in my relational field like I do in this marriage environment.
Absolutely. What's your take on polyamory or open relationships, especially the folks that say it's more loving than monogamy because you're opening your heart to more people and it's even harder?
Well, it is, but they're not really engulfed in the same way as they are in a fully committed relationship, are they? They can sidestep a whole lot of real deep stuff. I mean, I think at this stage of human development, I think it's a miracle when any two people can form a monogamous union, not from a survivalist perspective with roles, obligations, and duties, but in the authentic consciousness world. And I think it's the direction we're going. I think it's a very hard path for any of us who are attempting it. It's truly brave and courageous. And I do wonder if at this stage of human development, polyamory makes a lot more sense, just because I feel as though people start to freeze out at a certain level of monogamy because the development of their consciousness is not ready for that experience. The world's not prepared to support that. We don't even have love elders out there to support this experience. So in a way, I often think it's healthier on a growth level to be in a poly lifestyle. Having said that, many people I know in that lifestyle are just fractured and avoiding the deeper material, and maybe they're smart enough to know they should. And for others, I think it's part of moving through. Like in my 20s, it would never have served me to not be able to explore who I was in the relational field. I was a deep explorer of that field. So I don't have a simple answer. I mean, I think it depends. I think it depends what your sacred purpose is from moment to moment and what you're here to learn and grow through. And I could pathologize both of them depending on the context, and I can acknowledge the beauty of both of them also depending on the context.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice. And when you're just back to a question about you and your partner and maybe a recommendation for the listener, it sounds like we're calling all of this spirituality in this interview and in terms of a spiritual practice or a mindfulness practice that helps you deal with your own shit, what kind of things do you recommend for the individual these days?
Well, I don't care for the term mindfulness. I think there's enough mind. I don't believe in the monkey mind. I believe in the monkey heart, and I believe in heartfulness practices. So I believe in the importance of emotional discharge and somatic discharge. So bioenergetics, again, core energetics, anything that allows you to get into the guts of your being and to move the material that's blocking or obstructing your path, both because it creates more space inside for love to enter, for example, but also because I believe that's where the deepest spiritual transformation actually happens. I know so many people sitting on the cushion, and they do some kind of work on the cushion, but it feels so minimal by contrast to the work that I see happening for people who are doing deep, hardcore, dark work inside of their somatic structure, moving the material energetically and releasing the material. And to me, that serves us on an individual growth level, and it serves us absolutely in our relational field.
Great. I'm going to step out just to talk to the listener here for a quick second. Have you noticed Jeff's reframes? I love it's one of the things I love about you is your wordsmithing and reframing terms. Like instead of mindfulness, you just said heartfulness, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that about you, as well as your sense of humor, of course. And it's your reframes I've found over the years particularly helpful. And, you have a good one for enlightenment and realment, you call it?
Yeah, we call my press is Enrealment Press, and the book I'm working on is all about what is an enrealed way of being. I think mindfulness and enlightenment are just patriarchal constructs that have nothing to do with a true spirituality.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so if someone's going to do maybe sitting on the cushion, you're saying that, okay, that's fine, that could help, but what you care about is deeper emotional embodied movement type work that's going to get at our deepest unconscious patterns.
Yeah, see, I don't believe that stuff is some story we need to sidestep and bypass and turn around. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we need to detach. Sometimes we need to be on the cushion and get a vaster perspective in exactly that way. But let that not be the only way. Let's also go back down into the material, into the story, into the selfhood that formed over gazillions of years, the hand, the finger, the nose, the eyes, all of this brilliant temple portal. So much of what we call spirituality is dissociative. It's just about pulling up and away from the selfhood. And I know why. It's because we haven't figured out how to work inside the selfhood. So the only way we get an experience of something vaster is by jumping up and out. So jump up and out. But then what? Then these people don't know how to bring you back in. You've got to come back in, take that wisdom, take the vaster perspective, and find a way to weave it in with the selfhood so you become an integrated being.
Absolutely. Jeff, is spirituality addressing, like the spiritual movement, the New Age movement, whatever you want to call it, is it addressing relationship now? Do you see that more and more, or is it still kind of avoiding it?
Well, I call it the New Cage movement, first of all, because I think it's just another bullshit prison for the most part. And I know that there are, places where asking these questions of how did I co-create my reality are relevant, but at some point it also becomes victim bashing and a perversion of reality. Most people that are in the so-called spiritual community and doing relational work, in my experience, are bypassing the primary material, which is the material in the emotional body, because they are, again, often defining spirituality as something that transcends it. We've been calling it the spiritual bypass. I don't call it the spiritual bypass anymore because I don't think that they're actually going to a spiritual field to bypass reality. I think where they're going is a bypass of the real spiritual field, which is reality. It's the transcendence bypass. And
it's like dissociative.
If you're doing the transcendence bypass, if you're walking around like an automaton with no energy coming off of your physical or emotional body, you're not having a spiritual experience because you're not here. It's like I said to Lowen, I said, what is this spirituality? As I was doing body-centered work with him, going over the stool, feeling all this pain that was in my body I didn't even know was there, and made me realize how false I was if I didn't get in touch with it. And he said, oh, God, these people don't know what they're talking about. He said, spirituality, he says, you just go into your body, you clear your stuff, you enliven your body, you become spirited, and that's real spirituality. And that's my lens.
Nice. And so the New Cage movement, you'd say, is not addressing relationship.
not relationship in a way that's going to lead to anything sustainable or integrated. Listen, you live in Boulder. I've spent some time there. The love experience that I wrote about in Uncommon Bond was inspired by an experience I had, an Uncommon Bond experience in Boulder. We flew so high, I can't even begin to tell you. It's like I entered 403,000 new solar systems. But then it was absolutely unsustainable on Mother Earth because there was no accountability on her end, and I don't think I was emotionally prepared to hold that level of charge. I don't know if any of us are in this world at this stage. But, the bottom line of that reality for me is I now understand that we were not actually having a spiritual experience. We were having a split experience. We were like birds with one wing flying in circles and eventually crashing down to earth. So
yeah, I call that infatuation.
Yeah, and so, I know and many other things. And we know so many people who've had what they call a twin flame experience, all because they had these powerful experiences that transported them out of their daily humanness, but then they couldn't bridge it with their humanness. And so if that's what we're calling, spiritual version of relationship, then it's only going to get you so far, and you are going to suffer desperately as the universe and your personhood try to bring you back down into your material again to try to find the bridge between those experiences.
Yeah. Yep. Right on. All right. Winding down, I got a few more questions here for you, Jeff. Why is relationship so hard?
Because we're not at the stage developmentally where we can manage the material that emerges in it. And
then what do we need to do about that?
We got to, there's so many levels to it. We have to keep doing the individual work that we're doing. Society has to get more conscious and more authentic. We have to learn how to raise children better so they're not carrying this level of terrible emotional debris, some of which is not healable in a therapeutic format or anywhere else. I mean, I know a lot of people doing therapy that are not making progress. They're moving towards containment and away from healing because not all of this material can be worked. And so society has to change. Rule of law has to develop even more, so there's more basic rights and protections so people don't carry so much trauma through their lives individually and then enter relationship in that traumatic field. And we have to learn even more effectively how to clear through material. We have to normalize emotional release. We need little anger stations on every corner and city environments for people to walk out on the street and whack something and stop holding and accumulating material. If you're holding too much stuff, how are you able to get to the open-heartedness and sustain it in a dynamic you can't? So there's a lot of work to be done on a lot of different levels. And I mean, you're doing your piece and I'm doing my piece as well. I believe ultimately also so-called spiritual authors need to start drafting models or frameworks for relational expansion. Enough of the Ken Wilber's individual models on the various stages of something called heightened consciousness. I don't buy it. That's patriarchy's version of heightened consciousness. Let's start doing the work I was doing in my master's thesis with Gene Ochterberg, to draft and craft models of relational, start talking to people about the different kinds of expansion experiences they have in various forms of dynamics, and draft models and frameworks and create love elders that emerge from that so that we can begin to normalize these processes instead of shaming and shunning and putting them away.
Yeah. Boom. Wow. That was a lot. It was a good one.
It was a lot.
I love it. If someone wants to find their sacred soul purpose, what's your short answer to that? I know you probably teach entire volumes of courses on that.
Go into your body. Yeah, I found it in my body. I never found it in my thinking. I never found, excessive analysis perpetuates emotional paralysis. If I sit and think about it, it just strengthens me in the direction of that which I'm thinking about. It doesn't serve me. So the more work you do to clear the emotional body, to energize the body, I believe that all of these answers live inside of our physical temple. We just have to open and energize the temple and we will get information. And we need to go off and explore things, what I call depth charges, have various kinds of adventures and explorations of things we're curious about to get information from our experience as to whether or not it resonates, in fact, with what we feel we're inclined towards.
Nice. Adult attachment. Are you familiar with adult attachment stuff?
I don't define it.
Like Stan Tatkin's work on how you find yourself a partner as an adult, and it sort of mimics the attachment parent-child bond when you were an infant.
Oh, like Harville Hendrix, the Imago stuff, all that stuff.
I
Sure.
mean, it's not really, it's taking Imago to the next level in terms, for me, in terms of
Okay.
nervous system co-regulation in a partnership.
I haven't read that work.
Okay, I think you dig that because it's
Cool.
very much enrealment practices around helping your nervous system calm my nervous system down.
Nice.
You
That
know,
sounds like a good idea, Jason.
right? Rather than getting away from my
Yes.
activation.
Let's just calm each other down, for God's sake.
Yeah, it's very effective in my marriage. It works quite well.
Okay. Okay. I'm
When
going to get that link from you afterwards.
Okay, great. Yeah, at least that is when we're on it. It does. When I forget
Yeah.
or I go out the back door, it's like you know what I mean. Cool. So if people want to, you have many books, and what would be a good starter book that does have relationship stuff in it, or what would be the book to read relationally around your work?
Well, an uncommon bond covers all of this. It's number one in sacred sexuality on Amazon, but it's about far more than sacred sexuality. It covers the highs, it covers the crashes, it covers the work you have to do to sustain a profound love connection with another. There's a dictionary at the end with a bunch of fun new terms, including cuddlingus, never to be forgotten. Um, so I would say absolutely an uncommon bond. And if their focus is more on the individual work, which precedes going deeper in relationship, then I think Soulshaping would be the book for them.
Okay, wonderful. And Jeff, where can people find out about you? I know you have. I would personally recommend people just follow Jeff on Facebook because his posts there are usually highly entertaining, charged, deep, heartwarming. Like you have a lot of amazing stuff there. Where else can people find you?
Soulshaping.com is the main website. Enrealment.com is for the press if they want to check out our books or have a book to send to us to consider for publishing. And soulshapinginstitute.com is the other place. I have a very popular Writing Your Way Home course, a soul course there that they might be interested in, which is helpful for people at every stage of the path who are just trying to bring material to the surface that's been held within.
Wonderful. Cool, Jeff. Thank you. And final parting note for the individual, single, couple person out there that's courageous enough to look at themselves and try to work on themselves or their relationship. Final parting words to them.
This is brave work. If you're going to open the door, make a decision in advance that you're going to continue, because you don't want to get stuck halfway between survivalism and authenticity. And at the same time as doing that brave work, just be realistic. Understand the sociological context. Our grandparents didn't know, for the most part, anything about these things. We're at the beginning of a whole new way, and we can't go all the way in one lifetime. So if you can't figure every single piece of it out, don't beat yourself up. It's just an extraordinary thing to be able to shed these ways of being and even explore other ways of being. That already is an incredible achievement.
Amen. Thank you so much, Jeff. Again, just really appreciate you, your time, your message, the work you're doing with people, and how you're helping us move forward.
I feel the same way about you, Jason. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, boom. Jeff Brown, ladies and gentlemen. A man who's clearly done a lot of work on himself and been on the journey. And I just did start reading Uncommon Bond, his book, which is hilarious in terms of his intro, how he basically was a pretty jammed up guy emotionally like me and began to do his inner work because he was very challenged relationally. And so really, really inspiring book that I just started with him. He encouraged me to read that. He sent me a copy and I'm, okay, fine. I'm diving in. All right, I want to underline the main point of this interview, which is when you try to use spirituality to escape from your problems, it's not going to work. And I'm really with Jeff on that. If you see spirituality as reality, it's going on all day long, you're probably going to be better off, in my experience, because I tried that escapism thing and it didn't work for me. I eventually found an amazing meditation teacher who taught me how to be with my experience, Reggie Ray. And I'm really grateful for Reggie because he helped me go inside my body and feel every corner of it through meditation. and taught me how to be with a lot of disturbing emotions and thoughts and sensations in my body that I thought was going to annihilate me or kill me, only to find out that there was a breakthrough for me on the other side of that. So I spent years in meditation, and unlike what Jeff is talking about, that some people, try to run away into transcending their problems, I was definitely trying to solve my problems, but I wanted to learn how to be with myself because I felt uncomfortable in my insecurities and in my inadequacies. And I also just didn't know that I had all this pain and emotion locked in my body. So sometimes I'd spend 9 hours a day with Reggie in the community, and for weeks on end, and then eventually I would reach states that were pretty cool, but I would also feel an incredible amount of sensation ripping through my body. Sometimes I'd end up heaving. Sometimes I'd end up crying, hysterically laughing. I experience a lot on the meditation cushion, and any of you meditators out there know what I'm talking about. If you have a deep meditation practice, the whole point is to go into your experience, not try to get away from it. At least in the tradition I studied, and the traditions I really support are about being with the pain and trauma in your body so you can work through it, right? Any good trauma therapy does the same thing. Takes you into your body, helps you work through sensation, and get more empowerment on the other side, right? So in this vein, I want to offer you a little guided meditation. I'm not going to do it in this moment, but you can go download it right now. Just go to jasongaddis.com/products, and there's a guided meditation on the products page. It's the first one you see. It's free. You just have to leave your email address, okay? And that'll get downloaded. You can listen to it on your phone or your computer. You can lie down, you can sit up, and I guide you through a basic relationship style meditation, which is to be with your upset when you're triggered, okay, by your partner or your family member or a friend or coworker. Not being able to be with your experience causes a lot of problems in relationship. So it's in your best interest to learn how to be with your experience, okay? Learn how to be with strong emotions, strong sensations, because that's not going away in the context of long-term partnership. You're just going to get triggered. Plan on getting triggered the rest of your life, so cool. You may as well learn a tool that's going to help you with your emotional upset, right? As you know, I'm big on tools. Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and go be with your experience.